vaccinations amongst this cohort. Meanwhile, Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development Minister Thoko Didiza has called on workers in the agricultural sector to go out in their numbers to get vaccinated. Didiza says the sector is important in terms of jobs. The industry is considered essential work, which means that prioritising the safety of its workers is critical. The Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development Minister Thoko Didiza joins us now. Minister, very good evening to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. So let's first start with what is government's plan, especially around vaccination rollout in this sector, and is it in partnership with the private sector?
Well, thank you very much, Tsepiso, and your listeners. Indeed, there is work that the private sector has been doing working with the government, and I would like to thank the Minister of Health and MECs in the various provinces who have been cooperating with our private sector industries as well as working with farmers in ensuring that we can vaccinate as many farm workers and farmers in order to protect the industry. I would like to particularly highlight the work that has been done by the Citrus Growers Association, who have actually set up a COVID-19 response team where they've been working with all the citrus growers around the country. That's Limpopo, Mpumalanga, KZN, Eastern Cape, Western Cape, wherever we're planting citrus in this country, to really encourage and mobilize farmers and farm workers to take up this opportunity to vaccinate.
And I'm glad you're talking about farmers and farm workers. We know that there's sometimes and often been tensions between the two. What about farm owners who refuse workers permission to leave in order to be vaccinated? Has there been a plan set around that, how to circumvent that?
Actually, we haven't had an instance where farmers have prevented workers to come to work because they're not vaccinated, or had a situation where farm workers have not actually been allowed in the centers of their work, or those who are working in our pack houses or in the other agribusiness centers. Actually, a majority of producers as well as agribusiness industries are keen and willing to support that their workers be vaccinated. In the area of Limpopo, for instance, where we had mass vaccination, about 696 farm workers and farmers were actually inoculated around the 6th of August. We did that program working with the provincial MEC of Health. We're also joined by the now Minister, Joe Pahla, in that site. And there is continuing of that work in the respective provinces. So as the ministry and department, we actually want to support and encourage a number of farmers' organizations, agribusiness industries, to really ensure that all our employees and employers in this industry are vaccinated, because, as you know, even during the alert level 5, agriculture was one of those industries that had to actually work in order to produce food and fiber for our communities. And that is important to make sure that we support those workers so that they remain healthy in order to provide for food for the nation, but at the same time be safe for their families.
Okay, so Minister, will there be special arrangements made for farm workers and those working in the agro-processing sector, especially those sectors that rely on seasonal workers? Because I understand that they may be forced to move across provinces. What if they lack the transportation to do so? And also there's a possible fear of them spreading the virus should those be infected travel from point A to point Z.
If I may just indicate to you, as I was giving the example of the Citrus Growers Association, we actually work with the farmers and the farm workers as well as the agricultural businesses. So they would actually be in one center that might be in a farm, or it might be in a pack house where there's a congregation of those workers. And we work with the Department of Health to actually make those the vaccination sites in order to be able to support the department as well as the industry in that regard. So there's collaboration between ourselves and the Department of Health.
Minister, let's get a picture of what are the figures, especially around those who's been affected by COVID-19, both in terms of infection and deaths, but also the number of jobs lost due to lockdown. What is the holistic picture that you're dealing with at the moment?
Well, if I may start with the last question that you have asked in terms of the job losses, one cannot be able to quantify. But as I indicated, this is one of the industry that actually was allowed by our regulations to operate even on alert level 5. So it was not impacted upon that much by the conditions that were put in place to contain the spread of the virus. So farm workers and farmers continued to trade, continued to work even during that process. So the impact in terms of the numbers was really minimal in terms of job losses. You would also recall that even the farm workers who are seasonal workers were actually operating during those processes in those industries, particularly last year when it was harvesting time for avocados and your apple industry. They continued to operate because they were allowed by our regulations to be able to do so. We have had incidences where some of the workers have lost their lives as well as farm workers, but I may not be able to give you the number in terms of quantity, how many of those are. But each one of those lives that were lost, we really send condolences to those families because they've played an important part to make sure that majority of South Africans have food on their table, even under the difficult times.
Right. And just before I let you go, Minister, in terms of support mechanism for women in the agri-processing or agribusiness sector, what have you put in place?
Well, one of the things that we are looking at is to really ensure that we've got targeted programs to support women farmers and agribusiness entrepreneurs with specific support in terms of training, enabling them to prepare for market access in terms of the standards that they have to comply with, but also looking at how we can target them in terms of land allocation, particularly the position that we've taken in policy on 50% allocation of all land that government releases, particularly for assisting those who want to go into agriculture. We also are looking at the financing mechanism that will be able to support women entrepreneurs in the sector, because we think women are an important part of our society to actually assist in growing our food system as a country, but also creating more jobs.
All right, thank you so much for speaking to us and taking the time. Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development Minister Thoko Didiza.